Thank you everybody for coming. I'm really pleased to be here. I trained in Edinburgh. I'm sure I recognize a lot of you guys because I've worked with you in units and stuff, so it's super exciting to be here. So I'm here to talk to you about a Waterbirth that I attended this summer. It's a bit different. It's not the kind of Waterbirth you've seen in your units. So I'd like to start by asking all of you to close your eyes, please. So close your eyes and imagine you're pregnant. Your baby is due round about now. Now imagine you're on a beach on the Mediterranean coast. Is it beautiful? Certainly has potential, but with those men hollering at you in Arabic and pointing guns at you, you're not really focusing on the beauty of the moment. You're not sure how you got to the beach. Someone helped you escape from the horrendous detention center where you had spent nearly 4 months of your pregnancy. The good soul who helped you has disappeared. Most likely, she was pushed onto one of those flimsy boats you can see lying on the beach. Your contractions have started. This baby you made with your husband is coming, whether you're ready or not. And your husband is nowhere to be seen. One of the hollering men seems to notice that you're wincing. You're next! And he loads you onto a wooden boat, and suddenly you find yourself surrounded by 100 strangers. Men, mostly. Keep your eyes closed. You're about to give birth. The sun has risen by now. You've been having regular contractions since you left, and the men have been telling you to stop making noise. You can feel it now. You are about to give birth. Imagine giving birth in water. Water as far as the eye can see, dark and deep. And imagine that instead of the deep and loving voice of your partner, the calm and soothing voice of your midwife, you hear the panicked voices of 100 strangers, all as terrified as you are to be stuck in a tiny, unseaworthy and overcrowded wooden boat. You are dry for now, but you hear the clapping of the waves on the hull of the boat, and you know that one panic move from the crowd could make it tip over and make this a rather dramatic, safest waterbirth. You know about the deaths at sea. You know people who've left and have never arrived. However, this was still the safest choice. The deep, dark sea rather than the Libyan guns. There was no turning back. You can all open your eyes now. I've just told you a true story. This was the story of Constance. Constance was 22. She is from Cameroon, and she started fleeing from Cameroon with her husband sometime this time last year, roughly. She wasn't pregnant then. They decided to leave because Cameroon was no longer safe for them. They had absolutely no prospects as a young couple. So they decided to go, and they wanted to go to Libya because they'd heard in Libya you can get money and you can get a good job. Little did they know what the actual situation was like in Libya. When they got to Libya, Constance and Yannick, her husband, were separated and put into 2 different detention centers. Yannick managed to escape, and he is now in Morocco, and he hasn't attempted the trip across to Europe yet. Constance sort of found herself on that beach because of the goodwill of someone who was actually nice, who she met, and paid for her passage. She had no intention of coming to Europe in the first place. When we found Constance, it was our team of rescue people who came out to see her boat. She was in a wooden boat, which is a little less flimsy and a little less unseaworthy than the rubber boats, like the ones that was on the picture before. So on that day, we had 4 or 5 different targets to go and rescue at once. And our rescue team decided to go first to the rubber boats because that's the ones that are likely to sink at first. So Constance told me that as she was delivering her baby, she could see our ship. So we could have been there for her. But because she was on a better boat, we didn't go and see her boat first. Also, those better boats are a bit more expensive to travel on. And therefore, it's often more North Africans that travel on these boats. And sub-Saharans who have less money tend to travel on the rubber boats. And that's how we found Constance, surrounded by 100 Moroccan men. It was her and a couple of black guys that were from Senegal that she'd never met before. And it was just her standing out. And I remember the rescue team, when they first approached that boat, they were just completely stricken by the fact that there was this woman that seemed to just not belong where she was at that moment. And when they asked the question that we asked routinely, are there any women and children on board? They got the most incredible answer. Yes, we have a woman and a baby. The baby was just born. And then the doctor, who is always on the first approach, called me on the radio, and that was the most surreal radio call I've ever had in my life, which was, we have a woman with a baby still attached to the cord coming on board to you now. I already had about 40 women on board of the ship, and I was very, very busy looking after them. And I had a few kids as well to look after. I dropped everything and ran onto the deck. And there I met Constance for the first time. She was carrying her baby in her arms. She was being pushed up onto the deck by the rescue team on the rubber boat, and she was being hoisted up by our team on the ship. And she looked absolutely composed, cool as a cucumber. She gave me a big smile, and we went inside of the clinic. But the transfer was a real challenge, because having to put a life jacket on top of someone who's holding a baby with a placenta still inside and the cord not cut, and definitely this is not the place you want to cut a cord. I mean, she's already been born in such bad sanitary conditions, let alone having to cut the cord out there. So we made the decision not to cut the cord. This is little baby giving us his attributes as soon as he arrived. And then they brought her onto the ship. And that's when the challenge sort of started for me. The doctor I was working with had to go back out, was needed again to go and do more approaches of other boats. So I was sort of left alone. I asked him to send me a female assistant, anybody that could come in, but that would be a woman. He sent me our communication officer, who happened to be an Irish man and had never seen anything like this before. There was this moment where I wasn't sure whether we were having a 2nd-degree tear, a 3rd-degree tear. You know how, like, sometimes you doubt yourself, but you can call your colleague to come and give you fresh eyes. There's none of this there. The doctor was lovely. He'd never seen this before either. He was an A&E doctor. So because help was at least 6 hours away on a helicopter, I decided that I convinced myself this was a 2nd-degree tear, and she is still continent nowadays, so yay. And sutured her with the assistance of my lovely friend Donald, who didn't faint. And Baby was absolutely fine. His temperature was completely fine at that point. Shortly after coming on board, he started becoming a bit tachypneic, which was a bit of a worry. Resps up to 60. His pulse remained normal, and his temperature remained normal. We had nothing on board that for like broad spectrum antibiotics. We didn't have a cannula for this small actually. So the only thing I had was mum's colostrum to put the baby on the breast as much as I could, and decided not to call for the helicopter. It's really a hard decision to make because it's a bit of life and death. But if I'd called for the helicopter, then they would have been taken to Malta. And in Malta, you can't ask for asylum. They've decided not to take asylum seeking demands anymore. So it was not only a life and death kind of situation, but there was also a moral dilemma behind it. Do I leave this woman in Malta and then she will be sent back without having any of her story heard, any of why she did this heard, and no one will decide whether or not she gets to stay in Europe? So it's really tricky, but after 24 hours of colostrum, mum was put on antibiotics. Baby started to settle, rest came down to 44, and then we got into port after 48 hours. And they were both fine, and they're still fine now. Constance is still in Italy. Unfortunately, Italy is overwhelmed by the arrivals. There's been 180,000 arrivals in 2016, 115,000 by now in 2017. And Italy has been completely left alone by the EU in this. And so Constance's asylum seeking request has not been processed yet, 5 months after. So that's what I did on the ship. I did midwifery on the ship was a bit different to what we do out here as midwives. My job was caring for women and children. Constance was one of the more than 500 women I cared for during the 4 months I spent on board of the ship. A lot of these girls were really young. There was a lot of very young children as well traveling with their mums. And a lot of these girls had been sexually abused, raped, sold as sex slaves in Libya, trafficked into Libya, and now being trafficked into Europe. So a lot of my work was caring for them as women, trying to make them feel safe. They had a little room that was about the size of this room on the ship where men were not allowed to come in. They had this kind of space for them to just be women again, to be respected, just to be feeling good for the first time. They were allowed to go outside and seek the company of men if they wanted to, but it was up to them what they wanted to do. It was really important for me to give them the choice now. Women had a lot of fuel burns on the boat. Why is that? Because those flimsy rubber boats, they get a lot of fuel in the bottom of the motor will leak and the fuel will get in the bottom. And with the seawater, it creates this really abrasive fluid that will literally eat the skin out of your flesh. And this is what you find when they come on board, those kind of burns. So I learned a lot about general nursing as well when I was on board, because this is not something you do as a midwife. You don't really treat burns. But I was the only female medic on board. I was working with these 3 guys, amazing guys. Craig was a doctor, an A&E doctor, worked in Columbia University, a hospital in New York. Tim was 40 years a nurse when he celebrated 40 years a nurse when he was on board with us. And he'd been working 21 years on a helicopter, and he'd been doing 14 missions with MSF. And Stefan was German and had 10 years of experience as an ICU nurse. So I had the best team I could ever have imagined. And I felt very, very supported. And thanks to them, we were able to save nearly 5,000 people over the 4 months that we were at sea. Any questions?